Chapter 36. The Occupation of Offelus Hall. 6. You know, Alice, I got dumped. The fifth-floor hallway of Offelus Hall was home to the equipment storage and the maid lounge. Other than that, it only had a utility room and was as quiet as always, despite the events occurring downstairs. In the first place, the students had no reason to go up to the fifth floor. All of the housing rooms were downstairs, and most of the maids were trapped in the fourth-floor conference room, so the spacious hallways on the fifth floor were completely quiet. A commotion was heard from downstairs. It seemed that Ed Roth's tailor had blown things up on a bigger scale than she had originally thought. The bigger the situation, the better news it was for Lortel. Before long, the cries of the scared Clevius were heard as the students trapped in their rooms became more and more anxious. If the situation became any worse, they would eventually break down their walls and escape. Alice stood modestly in the dark and looked at the girl speaking to her. Alice, you know him too. The one who seems a bit evil and mean when you first look at him. You mean young Master Ed? The person we met at that camp last time? Yes, that's right. That's the type of person you like. I didn't know that. He's pretty good looking, but it's not like that. Lortel Keheland was sitting on top of a wooden cabinet in the equipment storage, drying her hair. She had just finished checking on the situation, to make sure everything was going as planned. The smell I get from you, Alice. I thought that I had smelled it coming from him, too. But he ended up making a bunch of emotional comments, which wasn't right. Is that so? He ended up throwing it all away without hesitation. Saying that I was responsible for my own choices. Lortel lifted up her hair, sweeping it away with a smile. People that are like us live by hearing those words. Alice could neither nod nor shake her head at hearing those words. Alice was the head maid of Offelus Hall, who has served as a veteran maid for over 20 years. At the young age of 15, when she didn't know anything, she began her career as an apprentice maid. She later became a manager at Offelus Hall, as she was recognized for her ability relative to her age. All of the veteran maids held a great level of wisdom, including her. That was why such people couldn't be easily bought with money. If you wanted them to do something that went against the beliefs ingrained deep in their hearts, you would need to spend a large sum of money, enough to destroy those values. That was where the largest investment was made to forcefully increase the scale of the occupation of Offelus Hall event. Abandoning the job that she had been loyal to her entire life, increasing the scale of the situation, then destroying Offelus Hall while taking all of the responsibility for these crimes. If you wanted her to commit such crimes, then you would need a large enough sum of money that would pay for all of the crimes committed and give her a life where she would no longer have to worry about money. Thanks to that, there was a large hole in the books of Eltstor Sylvania branch. Appropriate investments were essential for greater profits, but it was too much of a loss to just purchase the loyalty of a mere veteran-level employee at Sylvania Academy. It wouldn't be easy to make up. But Lortel didn't waste that expense at all. It was not simply for the sake of an investment or for a greater profit. It was a part of a series of actions that was also an act, to find people that were just like her. She had seen numerous people that would break their own faith by being attracted to mere gold coins. They were those that were usually at the end of their rope. Or those who were only living their lives, dedicated to small, meaningless beliefs and values. Such people were not worth being called the same type of person as her. The real proof was those who threw away their stubborn beliefs and values that they had devoted their entire lives to in the face of those gold coins. The more noble and valuable those beliefs and values were, the more Lortel's heart would pound in excitement. That was the only way for her to relieve her sense of loneliness. I'm glad that you're here, Alice. Even the veteran maid, who had served the students at Offelus Hall for more than 20 years, crumbled in the face of greed. In front of a tower of golden coins, whatever honorable values she had were lost. Lortel knew all too well that it was all just useless self-consolation. A life that was led by following gold coins and throwing away everything else, it was nothing more than a psychological defense mechanism to survive living such a life. Despite her awareness of it, Lortel never stopped searching for her own kind. Without you, how could I have ever established such a plan? There was no need to stress just how much the involvement of the head maid of Offelus Hall had contributed as a variable in this situation. As things are going, as long as we match the timing of the representative of the lower students, Willain, who is in the 4th floor management room, and half-heartedly give him ownership of the defensive magic that is spread out, then, one way or another, Ophelis Hall will be destroyed. Considering the people Lortel had trampled on all her life thus far just to survive, this level was nothing more than a bit cute. On a straw mat that was laid out in the ghettos, or in the rush of merchants that were risking their lives for a single gold coin. She lived a life where, if she didn't stab someone in the back first, she would be stabbed to death. However, even if it was done just to survive, there was no justification for such an evil deed. Saying that it was just a means of survival to protect oneself, although it may be considered commonplace, that didn't mean that it was justified. The situation seems to be going as planned, so I'll just stay here in the storage room. I have to act like a good student, one that is simply afraid of the ongoing situation and doesn't know what's going on. That's why I hid up here in the storage room in the first place. I understand, Ms. Lortel. Regardless of her unfortunate past and the circumstances that pushed her to the corner, Lortel was clearly a villain and a black curtain. If the afterlife happened to exist, she would surely burn in hell forever. She was neither understood nor did she deserve sympathy. Lortel knew that fact all too well. So in the end, the thing that she was looking for was one of her own kind. She desperately wanted a companion, one who would sink to the bottom of the swamp with her. Though she knew that there was no way such a person existed. You're such a pathetic person. You'll die in solitude, alone for the rest of your life, never loving someone else like a girl your age should. Or will you have someone that's like family, who you can open your heart up to? Alice sighed with regret at that fact. She then took out her rapier and pointed it at Lortel. Ms. Lortel, thinking about it, let me tell you something. At this point, for a magician to deal with a sword that was pointed at them at this distance, it could no longer be considered a fight. I am not someone like you. It's not as difficult as I thought. Ophelis Hall's 3rd floor hallway. It was still raining heavily outside the window. Walking alongside Taylor, they continued to move forward. Taylor, Ayla, Elvira, Clevius. They had caught Clevius, who was running away on the 2nd floor, and forced him to join their party. On the 3rd floor, Kelly, who was in charge of washing bedding, blocked the party's way. However, she was defeated in a timely manner. I am sorry, Ms. Alice, I couldn't finish what you entrusted me with. Kelly kept talking to herself until they had tied her up and thrown her into a corner of the hallway. Come to think of it, where did her twin sister, Shani, who was with Kelly almost every day, go off to? Of course, Taylor hadn't considered it up to that point. At this pace, we'll be there in no time. And in no time at all, they had arrived on the 4th floor. Was it because they were nervous? They felt that things were going much better than they had thought. In the first place, the 1st floor's difficulty was, oddly, way too difficult. Since then, nobody had tried to strategically attack Taylor's weakness. Quote. Elvira had an expressionless look on her face, unlike her usual self. She kept on thinking of that second-year magician, in the midst of burning flames, standing there with his blood-soaked shirt rolled up. His experienced movements, which gave her goosebumps, were the complete opposite of his appearance at the entrance examination. There, he had been rolling on the floor in a disgraceful manner. That fact kept bothering her. Elvira was someone that was full of pride. The fact that Ed had lost on purpose left a stain on her arrogant character, but she didn't completely lose her temper. It's bothering me. I'm sure that he was hiding his true skills. It seemed necessary to confirm that fact. Once Elvira became curious, she wouldn't stop, no matter the difficulties. Clearly, Ed Roths-Taylor had a hidden side that Elvira didn't know about. Run away. Elvira's worries only lasted for a moment. At the end of the hallway on the 4th floor, a crowd of lower students were pouring out. They all started to run past Taylor in complete terror as they went towards Ophelis Hall's exit. The defensive magic is going wild. Willain's such an idiot. I told him not to touch it carelessly. Shit. Where are all the maids who are supposed to be managing the defensive magic? Whatever, let's just get out of here. I didn't know. I really didn't know that this would happen. The students that came running out screaming like that turned the hallway in a complete mess in no time at all. Wait. What's wrong with you all? Taylor shouted as he tried to stop the students, but it was impossible. The ground started to shake as Ophelis Hall began to vibrate, little by little. In the corner of the hallway on the 4th floor, by the entrance of the management room, a situation occurred. The third-year magic department student, representative of the lower students, Willain. All sorts of defensive spells were curling around his body, spells that were so delicate to deal with that even experienced magicians wouldn't be able to handle it. Usually, it was just a spell that could be easily managed with just 4 to 5 maids who had a decent level of mana resonance. Since it was an emergency barrier system for the entirety of Ophelis Hall, unless you were someone who had clear authority, it wasn't something that you could just access. It was not natural at all for Willain to be taken over by such a spell. It was all a scheme created by Alice and Lortel, who had left the crystal bead that activated the management system of that spell in the middle of the management room. Willain staggered as his body was wrapped up and pressured by the spell. When he would swing his arm to one side, all sorts of magic circles engraved on the walls and ceilings were triggered, completely breaking down the outer wall on one side of the hallway. With a loud crash, dust rose and rain began to fall inside the hallway. I can't handle it. Save me. William slipped and fell on his face in an unsightly manner. That ended up actually being some sort of triggering method, as it began to blow out the ceiling and break down the other wall. All across Ophelis Hall, self-defensive mechanisms were carved into the stone. It was originally designed to protect the students, who held a noble status, from outside invaders. But now, it was like putting a weapon in the hands of a child without teaching them the dangers of using it improperly, and that weapon was pointed directly at the wielder. First off, we have to knock that delusional Willain unconscious. In his current state, it will be too difficult to get rid of each magic circle one by one. Even though her practical magic power resonance was quite low, Ayla was an excellent source when it came to magical knowledge. She quickly grasped the ongoing situation. As soon as she finished explaining, Taylor nodded his head and jumped out. He was thinking of lowering his sword and beating Willain with the backside of it. However, if you suddenly jump out like that, no matter who it was only natural that they would be taken aback and position themselves in a defensive stance. In doing so, it ended up triggering another magic circle. Taylor got knocked back by a wave of magic power that flew out from the windows and the bathroom door. He fell down but quickly stood back up, taking his stance. However, a new spell began to fill the halls, following Willain's scream. Wind Bomb, Ignite, Earth Wall, Shadow Blade, Earthquake. All sorts of magic circles began to activate, creating complete chaos in the hallway and also cutting off access to Willain. Needless to say, all the various murals, the wooden cabinets that were lined up against the walls, and the walls and floors themselves ended up broken and torn. Meanwhile, the students that were stuck in their rooms were already trembling from the sound of the chandelier falling earlier. Their patience would eventually reach its limit. What the hell is going on out there? If I stay here like this, won't something really bad happen? I'm going to break down the wall and get out of here. Just what the hell are the maids doing? Boom. In a room in the corner of the 2nd floor, a girl broke through her wall as she started to evacuate. This was clearly different from the time Clevius did it. This time, the building really was about to collapse. They would just end up dying if they kept on sitting in their rooms like that. Crash. Boom. As several people began to break through the walls, the students soon got caught up in the crowd as they started escaping from their rooms in different ways. Students on the 1st floor broke their windows and ran out into the rain. On the higher floors, the students who could use flying magic or had the skills to safely land after jumping out from such a height broke their windows and left. Students who couldn't do that broke down the outer wall of the hallway instead, or used their magic power to cast a brief spatial type magic that broke the floor, falling safely down to the 1st floor. The sound of destruction that echoed throughout Ophelis Hall seemed like it would never end. All the students kept evacuating in all sorts of different ways to protect their lives. Taylor's party had a feeling that things were going well, but despite that, the violence of the defensive magic circle that William was in control of never stopped as it continued its destruction. Elvira, do you have any chestnut flower reagents left? Don't say something so idiotic, Taily. That reagent only twists the magic power of a magician, it doesn't work against pre-carved magic circles. Elvira clicked her tongue as she lowered her body. She then sprayed a reagent around her feet that was made by mixing and melting the eggs of a devil fish with the mashed shell of emperor clams. In the center of it, energy from the magic power began to rise as all the different types of beginner magic that came from the defensive magic circles were temporarily blocked. It wasn't very practical because of its short range, but in such a narrow hallway it was a reagent that did its job well enough. Anyway, that defensive magic circle is only a secondary type of magic. The amount it has is quite amazing, but the power itself is bearable. Break through and knock Willain out. Saying that, Elvira quickly grabbed Clevius, who was hiding quietly behind the wreckage of a cabinet, by the collar. What's this? I thought nobody knew. You idiot, Clevius. It's because you always try to hide whenever you have the chance. Elvira kicked Clevius in his ass as she yelled at Taily. With the two of you rushing in, you guys should be enough to defeat him. I'll support you from the back, so hurry up and defeat Willian before the damage gets any worse. Taily nodded his head at the remark while Clevius remained completely dumbfounded. The outer walls of Ophelis Hall were falling down. The battle against the fourth-floor boss had begun. Considering the fact that, other than the fifth-floor boss Alice, the difficulty wasn't all that high, it wasn't long before the occupation of Ophelis Hall would be over. Ed, where are you going? Your wounds are going to open. It's not that bad. Most of this isn't even my blood. I ran around Ophelis Hall in the rain as Yennecar quickly followed behind me. A little while after, I found a large carriage standing in front of a staff passageway behind Ophelis Hall. The carriage, with its various gilded edges, looked expensive and dazzling at first glance. But considering who was inside, it couldn't be much more frugal than this. Originally, when that man would travel somewhere he would come with at least 10 of these carriages. Coming here with only one carriage meant that something urgent had come up, so he had shot out like an arrow. Looking at the carriage, it seemed as if it had been standing still for a long time. Almost as if he was waiting for Ophelis Hall to be destroyed. Eventually, from the staff exit, a woman that was neatly dressed in a maid uniform came out holding an umbrella. Shani, who was in charge of dishes. She was one of the orphans brought up by the head maid Alice. She should have been on the third floor of Ophelis Hall with her sister, Kelly, stopping Taily's party. However, unlike the original storyline, Shani had run away from the scene and was now knocking on the door of the carriage. The story was going off track. And this was clear evidence of that. As Shani took a step back and curtsied, a skinny gentleman from inside opened the door and exited the carriage. He was Victor, an old executive of Elt. Victor opened the door and lifted the umbrella politely, setting the stage for the owner of the carriage to come out. Eventually, he stepped out of that magnificent carriage. He wore a tight-fitting white shirt and leather pants that were tightened with a dark red belt. Honestly, it made him look quite frugal. However, he also had all kinds of gildings and jewels hanging from his coat, as well as jeweled rings on each of his fingers that were as expensive as a house. He was neither young nor old. He had a well-groomed beard that stood out. His dignity was like an extension of his body. The head of Elt Store, the Golden King, Elt. I had a hunch. Now, at this spot, this was the starting point for all of the unexpected events. If I remembered correctly, the Golden King Elt only visited Sylvania long after the occupation of Ophelis Hall. It was during the Battle for the Sage's Seal event. Eltie's position within the company was being threatened. Because of that, he tried to turn things around with the purchase of the Sage's Seal. It was because the Roths-Taylor head of house, Crepin Roths-Taylor, asked for the book at a ridiculous price. However, he was eventually sent off after being stabbed in the back by Lortel. After that, he ended his life as a merchant. And yet, he was at Ophelis Hall. I didn't know the process, and I was only left with the end result. What had happened, and where did it take place? How it had all ended up getting this twisted was completely beyond my understanding. It would have been arrogant to try and figure it all out at this point. However, it was possible to infer what would happen in the future. Maid Shani and Maid Kelly, the twins who were completely loyal to head maid Alice. Amongst them, the fact that Shani was already in contact with the Golden King Elt. This soon meant that head maid Alice and the Golden King Elt were secretly in contact with each other. But in the original timeline, it was clear that head maid Alice had been completely bought out by Lortel. She received a huge sum of money from her and took on the entire responsibility for not properly managing Opalus Hall's defensive magic circle. After receiving various disciplinary actions, as well as punishment from the workplace that she had been loyal to for decades, she had completely let go of her career. She was not a person that could be simply bought over with a bit of money. Alice was a person who held firm beliefs and values. Though, how Lortel ended up being able to buy over such a person through money wasn't explained in much detail. I had just assumed that she must have given her a ridiculously large sum of money. In the first place, Lortel was able to entice even the most noble and honorable of men to break their faith in the face of money. However, the scene I was looking at was clearly different from the original timeline. That definitely looked like, Ed, you'll catch a cold. Your body temperature is also dropping because you lost so much blood. Yennecar, who followed after me, took off the shawl that was under her robe and approached me, quickly wrapping it around me. You're making me so upset. Seriously, Yennecar. This is not a situation in which I could just sit still. I hadn't figured it all out yet, but I could predict enough of what would happen in the future. I have a favor to ask you. It's urgent, and it might be too much for me to handle by myself. With her arms stretched out, wrapping the shawl over me, Yennecar kept listening to me absent-mindedly, then she tilted her head. It was clear what Yennecar's answer would be. Hearing something like that, out of the blue, most people would ask about the situation first, saying things like, "What is it? Is it urgent? What did you get caught up in? Explain the situation first." How could I explain it so that Yennecar would agree to help? How could I explain the gist of the situation in a short time and in as much detail as possible? While I was thinking about how I should explain, Yennecar immediately replied. All right. Was it because she was being considerate, since I said it was urgent? Or did she really just not care about things like that from the beginning? What should I do? She skipped all the usual questions, and asked me straight up, in such a cool way, exactly what she needed to do. I thought to myself that I had really made such a great friend. Letter sent to Elt Cahaland. Greetings, most honorable head of the Elt store. The Golden King, Elt Cahaland. My name is Alice, and I am the head maid at the prestigious Sylviania Academy's Ophelis Hall. When you finish reading this letter, it will burn to ashes with an ignite magic circle that is imprinted on it. Please be careful, so that you do not get burnt. Even though we have not yet met, the reason I am writing to you, who must be extremely busy, is because of your adopted daughter, Ms. Lortel Cahaland. In order to purchase the Sage's Seal, as you had ordered, she is creating a financial crisis in Sylvania's Academic Affairs Department by inducing the destruction of Ophelis Hall. The plan is progressing at a fast pace. Sooner or later, it is certain that I, Alice, the head maid here at Ophelis Hall, will fulfill my duty. If the plan ends well, Sylvania's academic affairs finances will be in a tight spot. Thus, the Elt store will have an overwhelming advantage in regards to the purchase of the Sage's Seal. However, for a certain reason, I have come to know her true intentions. Mr. Elt, your adopted daughter, Ms. Lortel Cahaland, is not your ally. You must never trust her. She knows the truth. She knows that you killed her biological parents. I also know about the fact that you had recognized her talent, drove her life into a corner, and forced her to take your hand. She is planning to coax the top 6 Elt merchants and executives without your knowledge to force you to step down as the head of Elt store. The negotiations for the purchase of the Sage's Seal is also bait to attract your attention to Sylvania Academy, thus preventing you from dealing with any unexpected events that may occur at any moment back at Eltie's headquarters. I am keeping the secret letters from her room, as it could later serve as evidence. Though she thinks that she definitely burned them in the incinerator before disposing of them, it's the maid's job to light the incinerator. No matter how thorough she was, she would have never thought that the maids of Ophelis Hall would go through each scrap of paper that went into the incinerator. I am always prepared for her. No matter which way this situation ends up going, I will be punished for my failure at properly managing Ophelis Hall. If I give out Lortel's name, then I will not be the only one who falls into hell. However, there is no such thing as free work in this world. On the condition that I remain silent on the matter, I was promised a huge sum of gold coins by her. The only thing that would block a huge sum of gold coins would be an even larger sum of gold coins. The content I have listed on the attached paper are the names of the organizations I secretly and regularly manage. The number of gold coins that are delivered to those organizations will determine my actions. I am losing my eyesight and, for some reason, I have almost completely lost my sense of hearing. There is no reason for me to explain the reason in detail, but this year will probably be the last that I can work as the head maid. I am the only person who knows all of the facts of this situation, and I am someone who is in a tight spot with no one supporting me anymore. Depending on which side I'm going to support, the situation may become either more complicated or simpler. I hope you will be merciful and judge wisely. Sincerely, Ophelis Hall's head maid, Alice. Attached sheet. Sarin Region, Crooks Orphanage. Cohelton Orphan Shelter. Athens Cressel Orphan Shelter. Odell Region, Alton Orphanage. Temel Region, Public Orphan Shelter. Ed. You're injured. If you move too fast, your wounds will open up. What I had come to realize was that the variables in the world were too complex to control all of them. All I could do was give my best effort. All I was doing was taking care of the larger variables, so that there wouldn't be any problems. While pushing through the rain with Yennecar, I was organizing my thoughts. I didn't know why, but, if Alice had really betrayed Lortel, it was safe to say that the fall of Lortel would be inevitable. How important was Lortel Kehalan to the original timeline? In Act 3, she needed to confront Princess Peenia and lead a political battle within the school. She had an important role in gathering talents for the Right Mountain scouting mission. And she played an active role as a representative of the top forces during the Lucy subjugation. She was someone that held a tremendous level of importance. In Act 4, she had the position of being one of the helpers on the protagonist team, which would develop into a great friendly force that would directly confront the Roths-Taylor family. Other than that, she had a major influence in other, smaller episodes as well. It would be impossible to list them all. The fall of Lortel. It is just one sentence that would break down the entirety of all those scenarios. Lortel Kehalan disappearing from the storyline, that was a dark world that I would have no information about. Future knowledge and my informational advantage would completely collapse, and I wouldn't be left with a single advantage. But if I could completely fill in the role of Lortel, it might have been possible, but it would be a very difficult and arduous road. I'd been saying this like it was some sort of habit, but it was already hard enough for me to make ends meet. Adding in that kind of hard work was something I absolutely rejected. Unless I was planning to give up on my degree at this school and go out to live a life in an unknown fantasy world, Lortel Kehalan's exit from the story was absolutely unacceptable. Yennecar, do you happen to know where Zig's room is? I think I am going to need to ask him for help as well. Well, since we aren't that close, I'm not sure. Alright, we'll just have to look everywhere then. He may have already escaped from the building. Wiping the rain running down my face, we came back to the main entrance of Ophelis Hall. The evacuated students were running around screaming, unsure of what to do. The occupation of Ophelis Hall was coming to an end. Since the defensive magic had been activated, the faculty would be arriving in a few minutes. Lortel Kehalan was a person that couldn't be sympathized with or understood just because she had fallen. No matter how dramatic her situation may be, she was a true villain. Encouraging good and punishing evil, the universe corrects all wrongs, justice will always triumph. All of those were true sayings, but we had to ignore the lessons that came from such folktales for now. The existence of a black curtain that covered all the truth on the stage was indispensable. Nobody knew what direction the villain's missing storyline would go, or how the snowball would roll. It could end up destroying the world. In the falling rain, at the main entrance of Ophelis Hall. Thinking of how to deal with the situation to the best of my ability, I looked up at the half-destroyed Ophelis Hall with Yennecar. Chapter 37. The Occupation of Ophelis Hall, 7. The injured Taily was holding Willain down on the floor. By attacking with Clevius, he succeeded in cutting through the magic circles and was finally able to get close to Willain. However, Ophelis Hall was already a complete mess. Precious, expensive pieces of furniture and art had fallen on the floor. The outer wall was covered in holes that looked like stars, and no longer intact. Taily knocked Willain unconscious and tied him up, letting out a sigh as he wiped the rain from his face. The outer wall on the fourth-floor hallway was completely destroyed. Because of that, they were exposed to the pouring rain. The party was soaking wet as they kept wiping their faces. Phew, isn't it almost over, then? We just have to wait for the faculty to come. No, Taily, something's definitely not right. Hearing Elvira's words, Taily appeared puzzled. What are you talking about? You felt that something was wrong as well, Taily. Not just anyone can access Ophelis Hall's defensive magic circle. You would have to be at least the general manager of the building or the head maid to be able to use these magic circles to your heart's content, without facing any disruption. Then that means, I haven't finished yet. There's a black curtain that made this happen. However, after coming all the way to the end of the hallway on the fourth floor of Ophelis Hall, there wasn't a single person left that could be their enemy. That meant that all that was left was the stairs to the fifth floor. The real culprit must be on the fifth floor. If we don't catch them before they escape, then what would have been the point to all of our suffering? After coming this far, I'm going to finish the job and get a reward from the school. Elvira rolled up her sleeves as she walked towards the staircase. Clevius was shouting, asking, what's the matter now? While Ayla was at a complete loss on what to do. Elvira, if it's as you said, then that black curtain must be. That's right. It must be Alice, the head maid that takes care of Ophelis Hall. What are you standing around for? It's obvious she's on the fifth floor, so let's hurry up and catch her quickly to get rid of all these defensive magic circles. Taily sighed as he was ordered around by Elvira. After going through everything that they had and coming all the way here, it wasn't like he could ignore it. There certainly seemed to be a black curtain behind the entire occupation of Ophelis Hall incident. Thinking about it, it was clear that Alice the head maid was the culprit. There was no such thing as kindness without reason or faith without a basis in the world. It was such a natural understanding for Lortel that she had never once doubted it. She lived in the world of business, where you would get stabbed in the back the moment you let your guard down. Lortel was someone who had never experienced family, siblings, close friendship, or camaraderie. For her, a relationship built on trust was always a rationally designed structure based on thorough evidence. Therefore, a relationship where one trusts each other unconditionally was like a flower that bloomed on a cliff. It existed, but it couldn't be reached, a treasure that existed only in one's imagination. She was not obsessed with it, because she couldn't reach it. Obsession was a feeling that formed from nearly being short of reaching it. The only realistic option for her was to increase the number of people that were just like her. People who would break their values and sell their beliefs for money. Those who provide evidence to the fact that there was no unconditional trust or favor. That was what was important to her. While her perception might have been wrong and twisted, it wasn't a particularly bad thing. But once in a while, even something as sturdy as steel would shake. Even though his life was teetering on the edge of a cliff, there was a man who returned the 3 golden coins that she had placed in his hand. Even though he agreed to Lortel's plan for 20 gold coins, his expression showed that he had little interest in money in the first place. That man's code of conduct was far from the vocabulary of market value, payability, economics, rationality, etc. In fact, there were a lot of people like that. They were human beings who acted emotionally, risking their lives for loyalty and love. Rather than being cool-headed, they were foolish people. But Ed Roth's Taylor didn't seem to be like that. He was not a man who got swayed by his emotions like Ziggs, nor was he as nice as Yennecar. That wasn't to say that he wasn't swayed by money, so seeing such a person made her heart fill with the desire to bring him in as one of her own. The smell of another person just like her that had been constantly tickling her nose, filling Lortel with certainty. It was the conviction that he would be the same as her. No, you should be responsible for your own choices, Lortel. But just like that, she was dumped. What was surprising was that, instead of feeling frustration or anger, she felt a sense of relief. As she had often said before, there were too many sources of light in Sylvania Academy. It was completely different from the world of business that she lived in. When you walk through a garden full of the smell of flowers, you often risk mistaking the smell of those fragrant flowers as coming from your own self. No matter how hard she tried to remind herself that she was just a sewer rat walking through the sewers, her heart was broken. Looking at people like Taylor and Ayla, Ziggs and Elka, the feelings that she had rejected before were once again rising up inside of her. Jealousy. Obsession. She wondered if the day would ever come that she would be able to build a trusting relationship, free from bias and personal interest. In fact, the cliff where that flower had bloomed wasn't all that high or steep. Let's not dream about such things. I am a villain who will stay in a world run by business, backstabbing other people until the day I die. That was a promise that she swore by. Looking at Ed and Yennecar, the desire that had been buried deep inside her was finally completely awakened. Don't move. Soon, Mr. Elt will arrive at Ophelis Hall. The result was a rapier pointed at her neck. Alice, the head maid of Ophelis Hall, was a senior worker who had spent most of her life at Sylvania. However, her health was deteriorated by heavy work and a chronic illness. It tortured her endlessly. She had asked the school to adjust the amount of work, but there were only a few people who had the experience to take on the work for her. The management of Ophelis Hall, which was full of distinguished guests, must always be steady and safe. Alice's life has been a constant sacrifice for the goal of making sure that system was stable. On the day they had made the backdoor deal, approaching Alice and watching her tell her backstory, Lortel had also ended up revealing her own story. That was a mistake that she would have never made in the world of business. She had hastily come to the conclusion that they could embrace and understand each other's pain. When she visited Ed's camp, accompanied by Alice, they were even able to share their feelings together. I didn't expect you to react in such a way. I thought you were a bit more cold-hearted. Well, that's not something I can really say. What expression did Lortel show? Lortel herself didn't know, so she didn't try to understand. Miss Lortel, you said that you were going to get revenge against the Golden King Elt. However, I apologize. From my point of view, you two aren't that different. There's no human being in this world without their own personal stories and reasons. She closed her eyes and added on. And I am the same. At that moment, the door to the 5th floor swung open. I found you, head maid Alice. She's holding a hostage. Be careful, Taylor. Taking advantage of Alice's astonishment as she looked towards the entrance, Lortel quickly rolled out of her range. Lortel, are you okay? Elvira cried out, checking on Lortel. I'm okay. Look over there. That's the person behind this entire incident. We need to take her down quickly. It would have been the best choice to quickly put all the blame on Alice and run away, but Lortel couldn't open her mouth. Lortel, what's wrong with your expression? Just what was the expression on her face? Lortel looked back and forth between Alice, who stood still without an unchanging expression, and her classmates, who were saying things she couldn't understand. Then, after holding her breath for a while, Lortel ran down to the 1st floor. The Golden King Elt was coming. Eltie's dismissal plan was in its final stages. If she could just make up some type of excuse, then it would nearly be complete. But if Lortel, the center of the plan, was captured, it would all be ruined. Lortel's volition might have been firm, but she was still a girl whose body was extremely fragile. If she was tortured, even just a little, she would confess everything. Every cloud has a silver lining. The good news was that Elt had gone directly to Sylvania. He was not sure of which of his followers had decided to side with Lortel, so he came to deal with the matter himself. If she was able to reach out to anyone back at Eltie's headquarters right then, it would be fine. Lortel knew quite a few commercial executives that were at the head office. The plan was to manipulate the books, steal property, maximize damage, and then hand over the entire responsibility to Elt. It was already quite a concrete plan. However, the scale was too big, and if Elt himself was at the headquarters then he would definitely find out. Elt intended to defeat Lortel without fail with that trip. The moment he left his seat, he committed to seeing it through to the very end. The dice had been rolled. Lortel needed to head back down to her room on the first floor and send the homing pigeon that she was hiding in secret, then find somewhere she could hide until it was over. Lortel clenched her teeth as she ran down the stairs frantically. A longing that was at your fingertips, just out of reach, would drive anyone crazy. If it had never touched her fingertips in the first place, she would never have been that obsessed. She couldn't help it. No matter how cold-blooded she pretended to be, a lack of affection was a deadly poison that would slowly eat away at anyone. It was only then that she realized that there was a difference in the latent period, and that was just a moment of collapse. It was all because of the romanticism at Sylvania Academy. If she had never left her cold-blooded world, that latent period would have lasted much longer. She'd had enough of being betrayed and stabbed in the back. Only now, after going to the academy, did her heart break and her actions lose consistency. Nevertheless, Lortel had no choice but to continue running away. Either way, she had to run. If Elt arrived at the main lobby on the first floor before she did, the way back to her room would be completely blocked off. Yennekar's magic struck the wall as the sound of its collapse rang out. Looking inside the room, she saw Ziggs. He was continuing to work out by himself, despite the urgent situation. As the wall suddenly collapsed, he looked towards me with a puzzled face. What is going on, Ed? This is. Why are you still in your room when the situation outside is like this? Didn't you hear all the noise? Well, I'm not going to act rashly. Even if the building collapses, it's not like I would die anyways. Since Ziggs was born naturally strong, he didn't really recognize the situation as a crisis. He thought that the faculty would figure it all out and take care of it themselves, so he could keep on doing what he needed to do. In fact, some of the other students also hadn't left their rooms. Even if the building did collapse, as long as you had the specs to protect yourself, there wasn't a need to stay out in the rain. But Ed, I didn't expect you to completely break down the wall of my room like that. Won't it be too cold when I sleep now? You're only saying that because you haven't seen the situation outside. Anyway, this entire building is going to need to be renovated. The situation is that bad. Ziggs stood up from doing his push-ups and shook out his arms. Who in the world would think that Ziggs was a magician? Ah, Yennekar is also here. This is my first time greeting you properly. During the Glasgow incident, we didn't really have a good relationship, though. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Yennekar looked down at the floor, a little hesitant. To Yennekar, that incident was the lowest moment in her life. However, Ziggs was not a good enough person to pretend like it never happened. What happened already happened. You don't have to be so down, Yennekar. The disciplinary action is already over, you know. Yeah, that's right. Thanks, Ed. It wasn't until he heard us exchange such words that he let out a sigh, realizing that he might have brought up something useless. I'm glad that you've been doing well since then. You two seem to be on good terms. I also have enough sense to recognize these things. Ed, aren't you the type that prefers keeping your distance from the first years? Well, there are many of my classmates that ignore others if they look even a bit weak. As an upperclassman, it would only make sense for you to do it, too. Ziggs stretched his body out as he sat back down on the bed, relaxing his legs. But seeing you act so comfortable with Yennekar, it's refreshing to see that new side of yours. Are you two dating? No, it's not like that. At that moment, Yennekar started to tremble, shaking her arms as she glanced at my face. Perhaps it was because she thought that I denied it too strongly. Ed, does it make you feel bad? No, I'm fine. It was just a rude question from Ziggs. Oh, is that so? I'm sorry about that. After a polite apology from Ziggs, his expression slowly became more serious as he sat on his bed. So, there must be a reason why you broke down my wall and came to see me. Do me a favor. I promise I'll pay you back later. In the first place, aren't I the one who's in debt? Ziggs responded while letting out a smirk. He was talking about a debt that he has yet to pay off. I decided to respond by bringing up how he had helped me, whenever he had time, with building my cabin and other jobs that required physical labor. I just wanted to help you. That's all. That's why I did it. After that response, I put on my overcoat. Looking at this atmosphere, this doesn't seem like it's going to be an easy job. According to the original timeline, Alice should have cooperated with Lortel until the end of the occupation of Ophelis Hall event. There was no immediate way for me to figure out why she was involved with Elt. However, that didn't mean that there was no answer at all. The battle for the Sage's Seal, which was meant to happen after the occupation of Ophelis Hall. The school and Elt store played a game of tug-of-war over the research records related to celestial magic, left by the great sage Sylvania. With that event, Lortel's plan to overthrow Elt would blossom. During Eltie's long stay at Sylvania, the forces aiming to overthrow him would begin gathering at the headquarters of the Elt store. There's no better timing than now. Elt tried, but failed, to monopolize the sale of grain from large farms in the northwest region of the empire. He had also signed an exclusive distribution agreement meant to monopolize cotton with the Collet store, from the kingdom of Theron across the sea, but failed again due to a steep drop in prices. No matter how well informed and callous a merchant might be, it was only natural that they would surely experience failure and have moments where they lose money over the years. If they were unlucky, such incidents could happen 3 or 4 times in a row. Though, from the position of a business, this would surely have a negative impact. That would jeopardize even Eltie's position as the head of the store. Especially since he was one to advocate for meritocracy. How long had she been making plans? I didn't know much about the details. However, at the time of the occupation Lortel's plan to dismiss Elt should have been nearly complete. As long as she made some type of excuse, everything would be fine. But at that moment Lortel, who was the focal point of the plan, had her feet cut out from under her. Lortel was someone who always handled everything with confidence and rationality. At what point did she make a mistake? First floor main hall. Wham! A group of mercenaries, numbered at about 15 or so, had been hired from the commercial city of Oldic. In the middle of the group was Elt, wearing his luxurious clothes. The size of the group that Elt had brought in was too small for someone of his status. From that alone, I was convinced that Elt didn't want to make this situation a big deal. Are you students? Hurry up and evacuate. I was the only one in the way while blocking Taily, but this time there were 2 more with me able to greet him. The second-year star student, Yennecar Polarover, and the first-year runner-up, Zig Zeifelstein. Even though they were students, they were both promising individuals that wouldn't disappoint. Yennecar stood behind me, glancing around as Zig stood, leaning against a nearby post. By chance, are you Sir Elt Cahaland, the head of the Elt store? I called out to Elt with a cunning voice. Standing in the center of the mercenaries, the merchant nodded his head as he signaled for us to get out of his way. No way. It's such an honor to meet you. Sir Elt, the merchant who rules over the entire continent. I don't know why an important figure such as yourself has come all the way to Sylvania, in such a remote location. The Golden Daughter, Lort. The Golden King, Elt. The head maid, Alice. In the end, those 3 were the only ones who fully understood the situation. Lortel, who sought to overthrow Elt, avenge her childhood, and overthrow the head seat. Elt, who was trying to stop Lortel's plan and succeed in purchasing the Sage's Seal. And Alice, who was stuck in between those 2. After all, the underlying cause for the story going off track was because of Alice's sudden behavior. The cause was still unknown, but either way, there was no need to run all the way up to the 5th floor and defeat the head maid. Since the rest of the story was still following the original timeline, Taily's party should ultimately be able to defeat the head maid. I'd already confirmed that his specs were high enough, and that all of his party members were reliable. With that taken care of, the party that I was in charge of had a duty to take care of Elt. We are making sure that nobody can enter this building. Since the building is at risk of collapsing, for safety reasons nobody is allowed inside until the faculty members arrive. Did you get those instructions from the school? No, we are acting at our own discretion. Isn't this an unexpected situation? Here in Sylvania, when it comes to something like this, we have a system that will award prizes. That was a perfect excuse. But Elt would also be able to read the hidden intentions behind it. If someone as noble as you is here, then there must be some justifiable reason. However, why don't you try talking with the school first, and be treated accordingly? After saying all of that, I kept my mouth shut. Elt definitely didn't want to make the situation too big. It couldn't be revealed that the black curtain behind the incident was Lortel. No matter how old she was, Lortel still belonged to the Elt store and was the adopted daughter of Elt. If it turned out that there was any sort of influence from the Elt store behind this incident, then the Elt store wouldn't be able to escape the responsibility of covering the cost for restoring the destroyed Ophelis Hall. In the act of trying to trap her enemy, she ended up falling into it herself. If there was a part that the head maid Alice had not recognized, it was that. From Eltie's point of view, just sending Lortel off to hell didn't mean that everything would be okay. Lortel needed to be handled by Elt himself, not by the school. And the ones who knew the truth behind the incident were Alice, Shani, Kelly, Willaine, and myself. Thus, we also had to be convinced to keep our mouths shut. He still had quite a long way to go. You're on Lortel's side, aren't you? I hadn't talked to him for too long, but he already noticed that I knew at least some bits of the truth behind the incident. I'll give you twice as much gold as that child gave you, right now. So get out of my way. This was no time to unnecessarily raise emotions or compromise. Given the conditions of the incident and the urgency of the situation, he quickly named the maximum value that he could. A number that the other person would never be able to refuse. Thank you. But I haven't even received the gold coins I was promised yet, so what's the point in paying double of it? Ha ha. Elt briefly let out a laugh. You don't have a good eye for people. Do you think I'll treat you special just because you're loyal to that girl? Were you perhaps bewitched by that child's beautiful appearance? At that, Zig smiled and responded with an, oh, while Yennecar nodded and looked back and forth between me and Elt. She didn't seem to care about Elt at all. That child was born with the blood of a fox. She is someone who stabs others in the back the moment she meets them. I've been raising her since she was a child, so I know her better than anyone else. I didn't expect her to turn that blade against me, not after I took care of her all this time. Is that so? She's someone that would betray her own father. Instead of being loyal to gold coins that you may or may not receive, take the definite profit that's laid out in front of you. That would be the only natural and correct choice. He then looked into my eyes again. The reason why he didn't give orders to the mercenaries immediately was probably because he didn't want to escalate the situation. Or is there another reason for you to put so much trust in that child? Does there even need to be such a grand reason? All right, I can see that we aren't communicating. I didn't necessarily have a lot of affection towards Lortel. However, there was no way that I could explain to him that it was because of the original timeline. That was why I ended up using a reason based on, just because. There was no reason other than my belief in her. Elt would click his tongue at such absurd remarks, but I had my own personal reason. And I couldn't ask for his understanding. I lowered my voice and spoke quietly to Yennecar and Ziggs. I'll go and check out the situation. Buy me some time. I left Ziggs, who nodded his head, and Yennecar, who looked a little anxious, behind. Slamming the door behind me, I quickly entered the main lobby. I needed to find Lortel and inform her about the situation. Quote ellipsis ellipsis quote. As it turned out, I didn't need to run around Ophelis Hall. She was already looking at me, her pupils dilated, from the opposite corner from the door. Needless to say, it looked like she had figured out the situation outside as Elt was trying to enter the building. You weren't able to get out. Well, she didn't have her usual fox-like smile. Lortel was trying to say something, but her voice wouldn't come out. Instead, she nodded her head. Her usual appearance, one of calmness and composure, regardless of the crisis, was missing. She was probably surprised at seeing me covered in blood stains from my attempts at blocking Taylor's entrance. It's good that I don't need to waste time explaining things. Let's go around to the back door and get out. Do you still have the energy to run? The rain mixed with blood as the rainwater rolled off the back of my hand. I quickly shook it off and swept away my messy bangs, which were getting in the way because of the rain. Don't fall behind. Stick with me. I was getting involved with the main characters of the storyline more than I should, but wasn't it already an unexpected situation? It was only for the sake of fixing the flow of the story, which was already broken. Afterwards, I would just go back to keeping my distance from them. In the first place, I had already gotten involved to the point that I couldn't turn back. I nodded my head as I picked up the pace with Lortel. Chapter 38. The Occupation of Ophelis Hall 8. Goodwill and trust were always accompanied by motive. Slog, one of the 6 major merchants of Elt, joined forces with Lortel because he wished to be the next chairman. The Melburic Company's head, Seaton, also joined in on Lortel's plan. He believed that an internal disruption within Elt Company would bring new change to the power structure of the commercial city of Oldic. The reason that Sharo, a receptionist with the Elt Company, flirted with Lortel was the hope of making money by having her leak information. Caden, a trade worker, kept approaching Lortel because she often gave him tips. Teeny, a pet dog raised by the school, stuck to Lortel because the food she gave him was of the highest class. Attached to every favor was a motive. At least, that was the case in Lortel's world. In most cases, if that reason became clear, then you could see through other people's intentions and psychology at a glance. There was no blood-related family, lover who made promises, or allies that she spent a long time with. Paradoxically, she could maintain a cynical attitude towards all those human relationships because, for Lortel, a person who would do a favor for another without a reason didn't exist. It doesn't look like there's time to discuss the details. But anyway, did Alice betray you? Even though she knew all of that, she still decided. What a stupid, idiotic mistake to make. Her attitude towards life, one of never completely trusting another person, had become less important. The person that came to mind was Yennecar Polarover. Growing up receiving kindness and love, she was like a princess in a fairy tale that treated the world with only that same kindness and love. If you looked at her warm eyes as they stared at Ed Roth's tailor, she couldn't help realize that this was the love of a beautiful girl who had not been negatively influenced by the world. Seeing such a thing, she couldn't forget just how dirty she was herself. She shouldn't have gotten drunk off of the romantic scenery of Sylvania Academy, or allowed it to cause her to mistake herself as one of those beautiful, romantic people. I saw Shani meet up with Elt. Wasn't she a maid loyal to Alice? Ed Roth's tailor kept talking as they ran down the first-floor hallway. But even then, neither Alice nor Elt would report you to the school. The Golden King Elt obviously wouldn't want the school to find out that the Elt Company is connected to this incident. 5 people were bribed by Lortel for the occupation of Ophelis Hall. Head maid Alice, the twin maids Shani and Kelly, the lower student representative Willain, and the fallen aristocrat Ed. Alice, Shani, and Kelly all went over to Eltie's side. Ed should have been tempted to join Elt, as well. She suddenly stopped walking. Ed, who was running ahead, quickly looked back with a puzzled expression marring his face. He called back to her. There's no time to waste. What are you doing? Lortel finally calmed down and pulled herself together, forcing a fox-like smile. She ended up saying something, unsure as to why she said it. I'm sorry, Ed. I can't guarantee the 20 gold coins I had promised you before. As you can see, the current situation has become quite precarious. After being betrayed by Alice, her emotions felt strange to her. Lortel hated to admit it. She was now in a psychologically weakened state. If she weren't in such a state, she wouldn't be making such a foolish mistake. She didn't know why Ed Roth's tailor sided with her, rather than with Elt. With that in mind, it was best for her to quickly figure out his intentions and take advantage of him. But she was a fool to make such a confession. Just what kind of stupid mistake am I making? She couldn't believe that she was willing to turn herself in just because there wasn't a reason for him to be on her side. Who asked? You're going to die, so what are you standing around for like this? However, Ed's way of shutting down Lortel's words removed her worry. If you get caught by Elt now, your life will be over. No matter what you are planning to do in the future, you should run away, first. Ed was dripping blood as he kept on scolding her, standing across the hallway. It must have been her request that he block the first floor that led to Ed being hurt so badly. Nevertheless, he didn't complain that it was all too much. If it had been her, she would have complained 10 times over about how the work was out of her pay grade. Or do you have a better plan? If you have one, let's go with it. There was no hint of doubt in his voice. He was prepared to follow Lortel to the end. He was so certain of her that he was willing to follow along with anything that she decided. As she had repeatedly said, goodwill and trust were bound to be accompanied by a motive. But that man's goodwill and trust, there was no such motive. No matter how rationally she considered it, he definitely should have fallen for Eltie's offer. If he were to ask the same thing of 100 other people, every single one of them would have taken it. If you couldn't determine their motive, you shouldn't believe in them. She didn't know what was going to happen to her, not fully understanding what he was thinking yet. Just before, she had believed in Alice in the same way. Ultimately, it caused her to make a crucial mistake, resulting in the current situation. She couldn't repeat the same mistake. However, her mouth began to move on its own. Her inner voice was crying out, trying to stop her, but her heart was a complete wreck at that point. She was unable to hold out any longer. Flying out of her mouth was a confession about the internal affairs of the Elt Company, and the fight for power that was happening inside of it. There was a plan that was being developed at the company's headquarters to control the market price. It was probably my father who came up with the plan. Explain it to me. The market price of equipment plunged after a massive conquest of monsters in the eastern mountains last summer. After buying and monopolizing all the remaining equipment, they repeatedly made internal transactions. Illegal transactions. You can just briefly explain the rest. Ed calmly cut her off in the middle of her explanation. After monopolizing the equipment in the area, mainly in the base of the subjugation forces, they would repeatedly buy and sell the goods at the market. The key was insider trading. The merchants, who were secretly bought out by the Elt Company, had continuously repeated transactions between themselves. If you brought in 3 merchants A, B, and C and had A sell the equipment to B for 1 gold coin, B would then sell it to C for 2 gold coins. C would proceed to sell it to A for 3, slowly raising the market price. Eventually, the gold coins and equipment would circulate in the hands of the Elt Company as the market price steadily rose. In doing so, the market price could be maintained until the demand rose during the next monster subjugation. Then, they could sell the equipment off for a ridiculous profit. Manipulating the market price by using such a hit-or-miss strategy made sense, and it was a surprisingly classic technique. However, it was an unrealistic method because of the huge amount of capital that it required. For the plan, my father took out bonds from Duke Aldaugar and Countess Opal. However, by the time the date to pay them back had arrived, the plan for the monster subjugation had been pushed back. It was a situation in which they needed money urgently. Was the solution to this problem the Sage's Seal? Yes. Ed was very quick to understand, even though she hadn't explained much. It felt as if he had studied this beforehand. My father, he told me that he had found someone who would buy the Sage's Seal for a high price, so he ordered me to enter Sylvania as a first-year student and figure out a way to obtain it. All right, I got it. You don't have to explain any further. You're fine with just that much. Ed grabbed Lortel by the wrist. He told her it wasn't the time to be standing still as they began to quickly run through the hallway again. What's the point of talking about all of this after the fact? In order to put the school's finances in a tight spot, you wanted to increase the scale of the occupation in Ophelis Hall. Then the negotiations for the purchase of the Sage's Seal would become a reality, so he would take it as bait. He would come all the way here, leaving Eltie's headquarters empty. You thought about selling off the equipment during that time. While he was running down the hall, he explained the gist of the situation with a surprising amount of accuracy. The speed at which he was able to understand the situation wasn't normal. Lortel looked at Ed, completely stunned by his remarks. He didn't seem to care at all. In the end, mutual trust was the key to manipulating the market price through illegal transactions. The act between the 3 merchants A, B, and C was meant to artificially raise the market price by exchanging money and goods among each other. However, it was a business structure that would never be able to be established if even one of the 3 merchants betrayed the others. It was a situation in which, if one of them ran off with the stock, the other 2 would get screwed over. A, B, and C were examples, but, considering the size of the business and the market, there would be more than a few dozen middle-class merchants involved. Over the previous 6 months, about a third of them had been placated so that if the timing was right, a large-scale sale of the equipment could induce a plunge in the market price all at once. It would not be difficult to plunge the price, as it was an artificially created price in the first place. Prices were difficult to raise, but as long as you started selling competitively, they would drop in an instant. For the ELT company, which had a lot of equipment in stock, the plunge in prices would be recorded as a huge loss. From a very broad perspective, it would only have narrowed the surplus, but in the immediate short term there would be a huge deficit in the trading books. The important thing was the immediate moment. The big picture, which couldn't be immediately seen, wasn't what was important. Due to the various damages he had caused, ELT, who was already starting to lose his position within the ELT company, would finally lose his seat. In addition to that, when the allegations about the account book manipulation were added in and the demand for liability over the losses was made, there would be sufficient grounds for his dismissal. Was it possible for Ed Rothstalers to picture all of this in his head, with her saying only that much? No matter how fast the gears in his head might turn, there was a limit to a person's processing speed. There was no way that he should have been able to picture everything with only Lortel's brief explanation. Then there's only one thing that you have to do. But Ed's words were spot on, like always. You just have to send a message back to headquarters, telling them to start selling the equipment right away. Right. In order to repair the internal assets on such a scale, approval from the shareholders was required. However, when the head left his office, the 6 major merchants under his command took over the rights for the immediate handling of the business. Slog, one of the 6 greats of ELT, an old fox that joined Lortel after being promised a position as the next head of the business. He would happily put a stamp of confirmation on the sale of the equipment, all while keeping a straight face, and then would be sorry to say that the responsibility all belonged to ELT. Even if ELT angrily tried to punish Slog, his defeat would already be certain, as they were supposed to take place during the Battle for the Sage's Seal event. The event would end with Lortel smirking under a robe, sitting in the corner of a wobbly wagon as an enraged ELT screamed her name. After that, Act 2 would end after they chased after and took down Professor Glast, who stole the seal and fled to a secret laboratory. That was the main event of the act, on a scale that was much larger. If we go to my room, there is a homing pigeon. It's a direct link to the internal forces at headquarters. If we send the homing pigeon off and hide until the sales plan is implemented at headquarters, we'll win. However, I'm sure that my father has predicted this to some extent. He's going to try and capture me tonight, to make me confess to my plans and the names of the traitors that I have on the inside. The moment he left his seat, nobody knew what would happen. Even though ELT realized that, he came to Sylvania anyway. At that moment, he wasn't able to tell who his true allies and who his enemies were. It would have taken place on a smaller scale, without anyone finding out, but the news would have reached the company's ears in an instant. They had bet everything on each other. The final battle was a chase between father and daughter. Let's go out the back door, walk along the outer wall, and go through the window into your room. I was going to say that, too. All right, we're on the same page. They really communicated well. It was a gentle exchange of opinions that meshed well together. Quick to understand, active in coordination, and not easily swayed by emotions. Lortel gasped as she watched Ed running down the hall, holding onto her wrist. They could see the back door of Offellis Hall. Although it was not as magnificent as the main entrance, the luxurious patterns and paintings represented the dignity of the building. Listen carefully, Lortel. Since they have already discovered your position, you're in a tight spot. The best thing for you to do now is to keep hidden and make sure nobody finds you. There's a separate villa in the mine region. If I can just catch a carriage up there. If I was ELT, I would have already put people on standby at both bridges out of Akan Island. He'll absolutely catch you that way. Ed was right. The coachman that drove Lortel's carriage was a reliable person, but the appearance of the carriage itself was already quite eye-catching. If she passed over the bridge, she would surely be followed. Talk to the coachman waiting in the commercial district and tell him to send an empty carriage out of Akan Island. Instruct them to abandon the carriage and escape to a safe area. That way, they'll think that you're outside of Akan Island for sure. Then what about me? There's a cabin I built in the North Forest. You'll just have to deal with living there for 3 days. It was always in the last place you would look. The forest right next to Sylvania. Nobody. As long as we write a message telling them to sell it right away, headquarters will be able to handle the rest of the more complicated issues, right? Yes, that's right. Like a merchant who had been working with her for a long time, Ed's movements and actions didn't waste a single step. When she looked at Ed, who was able to solve every issue, she felt that it would be okay to trust in him and leave everything to him. Even though she knew that such a romantic relationship couldn't be, her broken heart whispered in her ear once more. This time, it might really work out. As she had repeatedly stated, obsession was not an emotion that resembled a flower blooming on a distant cliff. It's something that bloomed at the tip of your fingertips, just out of reach. Ed slowly opened the back door and looked out through the crack, then quietly closed it again. Listen, Lortel, there's someone watching the back gate. Ed quickly explained the situation in a quiet voice. There's nothing good that will come out of them discovering your location or what you're planning. So I'll go out and run towards your room, taking care of it myself. In the meantime, if there's nobody in sight, run straight to the commercial district. Got it. Lortel hesitated, before nodding her head. Ed furrowed his eyebrows in discontent as he scolded Lortel. Are you sure your head is in the right place? Why are you so distracted? Why yes, I understand. Ed grabbed Lortel by her shoulders and pulled her straight against the wall next to them. Lortel's lip began to tremble for a moment, but when she thought about it, she realized that he only did it to keep her out of sight. Once you get to the North Forest, they won't be able to keep pursuing you. After that, it's up to you. Ed opened the back door and turned to leave. Ed. It was not until she called out his name that Lortel realized she was flustered. She couldn't stand the idea of not asking him. Just why, to this extent, why are you helping me? Every favor had a motive. Once you figured out that motive, you could see through someone's psychology and principles at just a glance. But asking someone what they were hiding in a straightforward way, that was a mistake that not even a beginner merchant would make. And yet, those very words came out of Lortel's mouth. That was because she couldn't figure it out using common sense. Regardless of what others said, it was only right for Ed Roths-Taylor to unconditionally take Eltie's side. Whether it was financial gain, the chances of winning, or for leverage, Lortel was currently inferior in every way. Nevertheless, Ed was on Lortel's side. Ed frowned for a moment, as if he was wondering how to answer that question. Just because. I just kind of feel like I should, I guess. He responded in a vague tone, and then, he stormed out the back door. The sound of rain coming in from the open door and the sounds of a battle resonated throughout Offelus Hall. The noise seemed to be coming from the battle on the 5th floor, between Headmaid Alice and Taylor's party. The noise from the fierce battle marked the final battle in Offelus Hall. Lortel had a hunch that Taylor and his party would win. Regardless of the fact their opponent was the headmaid of Offelus Hall, the moment Taylor started using his swordsmaster skill he would be able to overpower her. After being pushed against the wall, Lortel stayed still for a while longer. She couldn't figure out what Ed Roths-Taylor was thinking at all. There had to be a motive behind every favor and attempts to gain someone's trust, but she couldn't see it. There was no financial gain, no ideological reasoning, and he wasn't the type of person to be swayed by emotions. Just what other reason did he have? Were you, perhaps, bewitched by that child's beautiful appearance? Suddenly, she remembered the interrogation that Elt had given him earlier. However, she quickly shook her head. As she has said before, Ed Roths-Taylor wasn't the type of person who would be driven by his emotions. In the first place, Ed Roths-Taylor always had Yennecar Polarover next to him. However, the feeling of unease stemmed from the fact that those two weren't dating. It was obvious from a glance that Yennecar was always staring passionately at Ed. But, that feeling of affection seemed to be one-sided. Boom, boom, boom. In the background, the sound of the fierce battle continued to echo throughout Offelus Hall. Lortel slid down the wall and sat down. She was already tired from running, but also from the fact that she was in trouble. Her legs had become weak. It's just that. I wanted to help you, so I helped you. Why did that sentence get so stuck in her heart that she couldn't breathe? Suddenly, she realized that something was wrong. The building they were in wasn't shaking at all. Considering the sounds coming from the fight in Ophelis Hall, shouldn't the building be shaking from the vibrations? Or parts of the building flying off? But looking out the window at the rain pouring down peacefully, Lortel realized the true reason for her sense of unease. Boom, boom, boom. She couldn't believe it, but that sound was actually Lortel's own heart. The rain had begun to slow, which made me think that it would soon come to an end. On the top floor, there was the ongoing final battle between Taylor's party and the head maid, Alice. On the first floor, Ziggs and Yennecar were probably showcasing their skills as they continued to block Elt. The back gate was far from that sort of flashy battle. Through the dark night air, I could see a maid standing in the rain. How long has she been standing there? Probably in hopes of preventing Lortel from escaping through the back gate. She was just waiting there. She was ready to capture Lortel for the sake of the person she was most loyal to, Alice. The maid's outfit was completely soaked from the rain and her lavender hair was loose. Slowly looking back to see who it was, it turned out to be Shani, one of the twin maids that should have blocked Taylor's path as the third-floor bosses. She quietly raised her head as she made eye contact with me. I didn't expect to see young Master Ed out here. How unexpected. She had come out there after hearing Eltie's orders to guard the back gate and block Lortel's escape route. Without getting rid of her usual cold expression, she pulled out a rapier. Unfortunately for her, I knew Shani's abilities and attack patterns like the back of my hand. She was even the type of boss that could only really show off her abilities when she was teaming up with her sister, Kelly. Being separated from her, she could only show off less than half of her actual skill level. Wasn't it a bit lame for the last hurdle? I confronted Shani in the pouring rain. The painful occupation incident was finally coming to an end. Chapter 39. The Occupation of Ophelis Hall 9. Act 2, Chapter 3, The Occupation of Ophelis Hall. The fifth-floor boss, the battle against head maid Alice. In the center of the fifth-floor hall, Taylor's party remained as calm and composed as ever. The maid's well-managed appearance remained unchanged. From head to toe, there was not a single spot on her that was messy. Even though the head maid's outfit was fancier and more decorated than that of the regular maids, there still wasn't a single spot that was ruined. In one hand she held a rapier, heavily decorated with a gorgeous rose pattern. In her other hand, she was gathering mana to cast intermediate magic. Not only that, but all of the defensive magic circles that were protecting Ophelis Hall had returned to her, as Willian had passed out. She had sword skills that could rival those of a combat student, was capable of intermediate magic, and even had access to the defensive magic circles of Ophelis Hall. She was different from Willain, who had been taken over by the magic circles and ended up destroying Ophelis Hall. Being the head maid of Ophelis Hall, she was already familiar with the system and the practical uses of the defensive magic circles. Nevertheless, she could not beat Taylor. After all, Taylor McClure was the protagonist. Regardless, the final battle of Act 2, Chapter 3 had begun. And in an absurdly quick manner, the conclusion was met. The rain fell onto Shani's rapier. I was almost out of mana. I only had enough left to cast basic magic another 2 or 3 times. I closed my eyes quietly as I began to remember. Shani's first strike would be a stab between my lower abdomen and thigh. It would always be the same, even if she were to repeat it 100 or even thousands of times. That was because all of the maids in Ophelis Hall used the sword in a similar way. Even if they didn't like it, their body has already come to remember that exact pattern. The rain continued pouring. Shani's feet kicked off the ground as she broke through the rain, narrowing the distance between us in an instant. If you looked at the fluttering hem of the maid outfit's puffy skirt from the front, it looked like a blooming flower. In an instant, Shani twisted her body. The hem of her skirt, which used to resemble petals, curled up and disappeared. While I was unable to determine its whereabouts, a rapier struck my thigh. Well, it should have struck it. Smash. Instead, Shani's rapier was crushed into the ground by my foot. My body responded naturally, even before Shani approached me. It wasn't a matter of how fast my reaction speed was, it was because I had the foresight. Shani's power was primarily optimized to work well with her sister Kelly's magic. Unlike Kelly, who was in charge of attacking from the back and being their main source of firepower, Shani took on the role of vanguard. She drew out the holes within the enemy's defense with her quick and subtle movements. There is almost no direct firepower, and her unnecessarily flashy and dynamic movements were only meant to attract attention. She might have been quite agile and quick, but her muscle strength was rather lacking. What? She had approached me quickly, thinking I was going to cast magic, but my act of preparing to cast beginner magic was all just a ruse. A magician could never give up distance. That was because magic required one to stand still for a certain amount of time to properly cast it, but it could only happen while maintaining a safe distance. In addition to that, their muscle strength and agility would naturally be greatly inferior when it came to close combat. To sum it up, those who were fighting against magicians were bound to focus on closing the distance. Unfortunately, there was a difference in weight class between Shani and me. Ag. Shani was startled as she tried to take out a dagger, hidden between her thighs. However, my hand reached it first as I stopped her from pulling it out. I bent Shani's wrist and kicked the bundle of knives, which were tied to her thigh, with my foot. All of her secondary weapons, which she had stored just in case, were now useless. For a brief moment, Shani's eyes began to turn red as the flow of mana began to leak around her bent wrist. The twin maids Shani and Kelly could share some of their skills. It was the privilege granted to the twin sisters born with a blessing of the stars. The dagger that had been knocked onto the floor suddenly began to float in the air. Kelly's low-ranking telekinesis magic. It was a living weapon that allowed swords, spears, and the like to attack the enemy directly. About 4 or 5 daggers began to float up and spin in the air, aiming for me, before they suddenly stopped. As Shani grabbed her rapier and her strength returned to her hand, the daggers rushed towards me. They were rushing at me like birds of prey, but I didn't look towards them. I lowered my body to protect my vital points and shoved my shoulder into Shani. Shani's magic wasn't as sophisticated as Kelly's. She could only borrow that power. In the end, it was still nothing more than an act to attract attention. One by one, daggers flew into my thigh, right shoulder, and forearm. However, it would be ridiculous to say that I had gotten struck as they fell right away. It was like a child throwing something at an adult. The only damage was a small amount of bleeding. I didn't lessen my strength while I bent Shani's wrist. From the beginning, Shani's goal was obvious. The flying daggers were just a trick to steal her opponent's attention and force them to respond. Much of Shani's fighting power came from her unique agile movements. Once you took control of those movements, she would never be able to gain the upper hand. My blood started to drip as my elbow rested on her solar plexus, laying on the floor. Cough. Shani stopped breathing for a moment. I stabbed my nail into her forearm and added some strength to scrape her skin. That's right. I kicked away her rapier, which was rolling on the floor. She was an opponent that made up for the difference in muscle strength with her sleek movements and high agility. Once she lost her weapons and her movements were suppressed, there was no hope for her. It took less than a minute to get to that point. But as the rainwater kept on falling into her bloodshot eyes, she grabbed my chest and pushed at me. She kept on scratching me with her fingernails, kicking me in the back with her thigh, which altogether began to drive me mad. I can't disappoint Ms. Alice after coming this far. Move. Get out of my way. Her elegance and polite manners were a thing of the past as she began rolling around on the muddy ground. I wiped my blood off and grabbed Shani's neck tightly as I spoke straight to her face. Alice will lose. The blood dripping from my face fell onto Shani's white cheek. The drops of blood running down her face and around her ears mixed with the rain as it wet the ground. What do you know? What do you know about Ms. Alice? To be honest, I didn't know much. The occupation of Ophelis Hall was just a stepping stone event. The personal backstory of the event boss was beyond my realm of knowledge. Do you have any idea how much Ms. Alice has suffered? Even in this situation, do you even know how hard she fought to stay true to her beliefs? To be honest, Sylvania's failed swordmaster didn't go into much depth about Alice's personal situation. There were many episodes that needed to be processed, so maybe they thought that adding development to each side character would end up increasing the volume too much and slow down the pacing. That's none of my business. With those words, Shani's eyes widened. Since I didn't have the answer, I was left speechless. She was not wrong. Boom! A huge explosion erupted coming from the 5th floor of Ophelis Hall. The white spectacle that lit up the darkness of the late night had clearly come from Taylor's swordmaster skill. The battle against the head maid Alice was nearing its end. Shani, with her bloodshot eyes, took advantage of my shock and reached her hand out towards my face. She used her fingernail to stab my arm to make me loosen my grip, but I had already grabbed her by the side of her neck and pressed down hard. Little by little, she was starting to run out of breath as she began to faint. In a last-ditch effort, she began to scratch at the back of my neck and collarbone like crazy. You don't even know a thing about Alice. So how can you be on the side of that wicked girl? Reaching out her hand, Shani choked as her voice was filled with hatred. Do you have any idea how many orphans Alice saved? I was one of them. If it wasn't for Alice, I couldn't have gotten such a job, made any money, or even continued living in the first place. I didn't ask. Regardless of the scratches that she made around my face and neck, I kept pushing on Shani. I was shocked by the hate in her bloodshot eyes, but I didn't change my expression. I won't forgive, I can't believe, taking Lortel's side, Ed Roth. Her white hands, which were gripping my face, gradually loosened. Both of her arms fell into the mud. I relaxed my grip as I looked down at Shani, who had fainted. I slowly stood up. My whole body was muddy as the defeated Shani's body lay in front of me. Her bloodshot eyes and flowing tears were imprinted into my memory. It was a shame, but I didn't know any of the extra storylines. What did she expect me to do when I didn't know? Just how did Alice end up saving Shani and Kelly? What did she have to go through to become the head maid of Ophelis Hall? Just how much did Alice struggle through to get there? There was no way for me to find out. Sylvania's failed swordmaster didn't put a spotlight on that story. There was no story in the main storyline that had shed light on them. In the first place, there were many stories in this world that had never been shown. I turned my head and looked up at the half-destroyed Ophelis Hall. On the top floor, Alice, who was one of the main people behind this situation, must be getting defeated by Taylor. Nevertheless, the half-destroyed Ophelis Hall wouldn't return. The financial damage had already been done, which would put pressure on the school. Some of the students wouldn't have a place to live now, so they would end up complaining. And there may have even been some students who had gotten injured by the falling debris. Furthermore, the pressure on the school's finances may even result in a reduction in student benefits and welfare. The size of scholarships may reduce. A major change in dormitory policy was needed, and some students may even have to give up on their studies. What's the point in trying to weigh the damages caused by this incident when compared to the relief efforts Alice had done before, just to figure out if she was in the right? Who was Alice to weigh the importance of good and evil, and to what extent could she overlook evil in the decisions she made and the methods she took? Or was she a villain that was on the same level as Lortel or Elt? People who could make philosophical comments and decide on their own choices in life were those who were living a privileged, fulfilling life. However, my life choices and ultimate goal had never changed, not even once, since I ended up possessing this body. It was to survive. I knew exactly what kind of crazy storyline the world is progressing into. That was why I had taken Lortel's side to survive. That was it. Unfortunately, there were no profound philosophical reasons for agony or personal morals that went into this decision. As it was with all of the decisions we made in life. You have defeated Shani, who is in charge of dishes. You have acquired the combat type skill, pain endurance. You have acquired the combat type skill, battlefield vision. The pain endurance skill, which temporarily allowed you to forget pain and delayed the consumption of vitality. And the battlefield vision skill, which allowed you to momentarily process the opponent's movements in slow motion. I've finally learned it. In the pouring rain, I looked at the scratches all over my body while organizing the thoughts of what my next steps were in my head. There was still work that had to be taken care of. I picked up a stone and quickly went on my way again. Now I had to enter Lortel's room. After that, everything else would be a breeze. Crash! I broke her window as I crawled into Lortel's room. Crack! Stepping on the fallen glass shards, I looked around Lortel's room. It was spacious and grand, as expected of a room in Ophelis Hall. On the other hand, it felt a bit awkward. Yennekar's room, from my memory, was a room full of cute ruffles and pretty decorations, with a variety of things that were just like her, but her peer's room was strangely more businesslike. Luxurious pieces of wooden furniture and various decorations seemed to have been arranged out of necessity. Her desk was covered in papers and the books were angled without a single error, resembling soldiers lining up in a row. The gap between Lortel and Yennekar was so clear that I couldn't help but let out a bitter smile without realizing it. That's so like her, I spoke to myself as I pulled out a large wooden box from underneath her desk. Inside was a bird cage with, naturally, a bird inside of it. I took out the cage, put it on the desk, and pulled out a pen from the corner of the desk. I flipped over a random piece of paper lying on the desk and began to write. Elt is in Sylvania. It will take at least 3 days for him to get back to the headquarters. Sell all the equipment that you have secured. I rolled up the piece of paper and put it in a small container tied to the leg of the pigeon. Then, I took out the pigeon and let it spread its wings in freedom. The homing pigeon, which flew through the rain in the night sky, would return with Eltie's head. I was relieved to think that I had finished a major task and sighed. It had been a long time since I'd last seen the Northern Forest. The Northern Forest. It was a place where I struggled desperately to survive, each and every day. But after going through many trials, I ended up realizing that there was nowhere else like the forest. No matter how shabby and ugly my house was, it was still my house. It was the most comfortable place for me, and there was nothing I could do about it. The rain had nearly stopped. No, it had stopped. There was a unique atmosphere in the forest right after the rain. Though it wasn't raining, the heavy moisture that pressed down on my skin still remained, making it difficult to move. However, the pleasant feeling of the damp atmosphere was a mystery of vegetation. Thanks to the humidity, it felt like I was a part of the forest as I made my way through the thick scent of grass. However, to claim to be a part of this beautiful nature. My appearance was too off-putting. A shirt covered in blood, wounds on my thighs and shoulders. The bleeding had stopped, but the blood stains remained as I limped around like a zombie. Still, those kinds of wounds would recover quickly when you considered my past experiences. It was better than being attacked by a wild boar or falling while picking fruits from a tree. As long as I put something over them, then they would heal quickly. Phew, I let out a deep breath as I began to speed up my steps. It wasn't a trail, it was just a path, close to the mountain road that cut through the grass. If the entire plan went well, Lortel should have been waiting at the cabin. There wasn't much time left for Elt. Being in his position, a person couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. Before the homing pigeon arrived and the sale went through, he would have to find Lortel and make her admit the truth. It would be in a somewhat violent and cruel way. Originally, it wouldn't have been too difficult. Using common sense, nobody would imagine that the head of the Elt company would be in such a place at such a time. Neither Lortel nor I did. For a man of his stature, rumors usually would spread a few days ahead of his visit. Without the help of Ziggs and Yennekar, and other events that worked out in my favor, Lortel would have ended up going down a merciless path of failure. Still, there was a fairly high chance of succeeding. That was because time was on Lortel's side. Somewhere along the path the pigeon would take between that night and the next afternoon was the Maginot Line. Once he heard that Lortel's wagon had escaped outside of Akan Island, Elt definitely wouldn't stay still. There was no way for him to search from inside of Akan Island calmly in such an urgent situation. There was a high possibility that it would all just be a waste of time, chasing the wagon that escaped while trying to deduce Lortel's whereabouts and the carriage's path. Even if he was able to catch the coachman quickly and make him confess her whereabouts, he would then need to turn around and go all the way back to Akan Island. The failure to win at Ophelis Hall would become his bitter, disappointing mistake. Please, when I return to the cabin, please let Lortel be waiting there. As I thought that, I suddenly saw a girl at the bottom of the small hill. Maybe it was because of the long night's hardships, but her reddish-colored hair, which usually resembled a blazing flame, had no shine. Her hair, which was tied to one side, had fallen loose. Her wet body didn't seem to be drying, even though the rain had stopped. A girl who had lived her entire life in a world revolving around golden coins and calculating, understanding, estimating every move. She was the golden daughter, so to speak. I couldn't see her expression as she was wearing a hood. "Wow, did you come all the way here to see me? How kind of you." I playfully threw out those words, but no response came back. Maybe she was quite exhausted, stumbling down the path coming here. The rain stopped and the clouds began to clear as the rising moonlight cast a shadow. It ended up making it even harder to decipher the girl's expression. And then she pulled out a sharp, silver dagger from under her arm. Goosebumps rose all over my body. What? Did she pick up one of the daggers that Shani was using? If she had come out through the back gate after I defeated Shani, she would have been able to obtain one. The use of magic power was too conspicuous, so maybe she was going to just keep a dagger as a means of self-defense. I shook my head. Pull yourself together. That's just a very hopeful interpretation. I tried to step back, but I couldn't take another due to my injuries. Yeah, did I get a little too complacent? She was the golden daughter, Lortel. She was someone who was cruel and ungrateful. Someone who took advantage of people as much as she could before throwing them away. Right. From Lortel's point of view, now was the time to get rid of Edroth's tailor. Regardless of what ended up happening to Elt, those who knew the truth about the relation between the Elt Company and the occupation of Ophelis Hall had to be reduced to the smallest number possible. There were 5 people that she had brought in. Alice, Shani, Kelly, Willain, and me, Edroth's tailor. Even if she ended up overthrowing Elt, she still needed to keep the mouths of those 5 people shut. Alice was a person that moved according to the logic of money. Even though she may not be able to open up her heart to her again, as she has already been betrayed by her once, she could be confident that she could shut her up with enough money. The reason she had betrayed her in the first place was probably because of the amount of money. And not just that. If Elt were to lose his position, Alice would have no choice but to fall into Lortel's hand. As long as she could clearly see the circumstances, then she could use her to her heart's content. Shani and Kelly were maids who were loyal to Alice. As long as she could persuade Alice, then those two would keep their mouths shut as well. Willain, the representative of the lower students, was brought into the plan with money from the beginning. He always wanted to be the voice of the lower students, but whenever he was given money he was easily swayed and taken advantage of. And the last variable was Edroth's tailor, who was out of her control. At first she thought that he could be bought with money, but now she was unsure if buying him over with just money was possible. She had to take into account the risk of being stabbed in the back, while trying to forcefully figure out his inner thoughts and plans. A remote part of the northern forest. Nobody would notice amidst the chaos of the Ophelis Hall incident. The opponent's whole body was a wreck. He was in a state of total exhaustion, with an injury that made him unable to even properly hold his body up. There was a sharp weapon in her hand. She was a girl who was like the incarnation of greed, who unconditionally seized even the smallest opportunities. I knew better than anyone else that she wasn't a person who would give up an opportunity like this. Let's calm down. I could overcome the situation. She was as tired as I was, and we weren't so deep in the woods that it would be impossible to make it to the teacher district if I ran away immediately. In addition, there are also quite a few spirits in the forest that were favorable to me. With their help, we could interfere with Lortel's movement for a while. Well, I needed to admit what was obvious. I had gotten a bit complacent. I couldn't take into account the situation because I was busy dealing with so many sudden variables. Even despite that, I should have never forgotten the nature behind the character, Lortel Cahaland. Act 2, Chapter 10, The Battle for the Sage's Seal. It took place after Act 2, Chapter 3, The Occupation of Ophelis Hall. Did I already forget about Lortel's role in the climax? Lortel Cahaland was an evil girl who would take advantage of anyone, regardless of who they were, and immediately throw them away afterwards. Someone who stabbed her own adoptive father in the back, took advantage of Taylor and his party by knowing their every move, and then ran away with all the benefits by herself in the end. I still remember the scene where she mockingly smiled in front of the school, holding onto the sage's seal. When she smiled, head down, as she listened to Eltie's screams. Those scenes were still stuck in my mind. This was not the time for me to be acting like this. I need to use my brain. The moment I tried to straighten my body and come up with a decent escape plan. RRRRRRRRRIP. Lortel used the dagger to tear a hole into her expensive-looking robe. She then stumbled forward, walking towards me. You ended up getting hurt, to this extent. With the torn fabric, she tied it around my wound. I could see her expression now that she was closer. It looked like she was going to cry. I'll help you. I lit the campfire, since it stopped raining. First, we should warm up. Asterisk. Crackle, crackle. So, did everything go as planned? Ed, you're really quiet. Of course it did. I'm Lortel Kehaland. The moon and stars came out like usual. The sky after the rain had stopped. It felt rather cozy. She grinned, holding onto a mug next to the burning campfire. She had finally returned to her fox-like appearance. I got a promise from the coachman. He said that he would try his best to attract their attention and buy some time. He's even willing to risk his life. He was that loyal. What type of trick did you use? You want to know? Just by looking at her wide smile, I could tell that it wasn't a very honorable method. I refrained from asking any further questions. Don't tell me, she wouldn't have taken their family hostage, right? Right. Well, it was a lot different than I had planned, but, anyway, I am in great debt to you, Ed. Thank you. Is that so? Did you know? If this plan goes well, then I'll join the ranks of those highest in power within the Elt Company. The position of head would be taken by another senior merchant, but since she was the one who actually created an empty seat for the new head, she would become an influential figure within the business. The fact that I owe you a debt, isn't it something incredible? What do you think? Don't you feel a lot of pressure on your shoulders? Don't you think I'm amazing? Wow, that reaction was so lame. I felt relieved to see that her sparkling smile while saying those words was no different from her usual smile, the one that hid her evil intentions. While laughing so mischievously, she took a sip of the herbal tea from the mug, and quietly lowered her voice. Thank you so much. I will never forget it. Give me the 20 gold coins you promised me on time, then. Ha ha ha. That's, of course I will. She never got rid of her smile, as if everything was great. Blinking and staring straight at my face, I felt uncomfortable, as if she was trying to see what was hidden in my heart. That's that. But there's something I wanted to ask you. What? Do you still have something to take care of? Is it about Alice? No, nothing like that. I'm going to take care of that stuff on my own. What I wanted to ask about was Yennecar. It was a natural technique for merchants to change a topic naturally like the wind. Ed, you're very close to Yennecar. Right. I tilted my head at that question and answer immediately. Yeah, I'm close with Yennecar. She's a good person. She is definitely a nice, and great upperclassman that I respect. She's always considerate of others and good-hearted. Yeah, so, what's up? Saying that, Lortel looked down at the herbal tea and then looked up at the sky. The sky from the river in the northern forest was as high and clear as usual. I'm not that nice of a person. She recited those words while quietly holding onto the mug, gently closing her eyes. Asterisk. Boom. The first floor of Ophelis Hall was no longer only partially destroyed. It was now completely destroyed. Ziggs Eifelstein finished the battle and straightened his body. The mercenaries, brought by Elt, were less impressive than he had expected. They didn't look like mercenaries under direct control of the Elt Company. Though even at that level of quality, if there were too many then it could have become hard for Ziggs. Quality was important, but quantity could always make up for it. However, the mercenaries' training was so poor that Ziggs and Yennecar alone were enough to defend Ophelis Hall. Were they just mercenaries who were brought over in a hurry? It must have been quite the urgent situation, or perhaps a situation in which he didn't want anyone to know that he had left his seat. Coming up with such a guess, Ziggs sat down on the rubble near him. For some reason, I have a feeling that we are going to have another fight. I'm a little worried about the head maid, as well. It seems like there is something weird going on. He didn't feel completely relieved, but that couldn't be helped given that the situation had become like this. Phew. Good work, Yennecar. Ed suddenly requested help and, without fully understanding the situation, he ended up helping. Though, somehow everything ended well. Elt suddenly received a report from his subordinate in the middle of it all and rushed out. It seemed that he was no longer interested in Ophelis Hall. Was this all according to Ed's plan? He hoped that he could at least hear a detailed explanation of the situation from him later. With that in mind, Ziggs looked towards Yennecar. Among the mid-ranking spirits there was a girl. At first, she looked a bit worried. But as the battle continued, the spirits grew stronger and stronger, to an unbelievable strength. Since he was afraid of casualties, he had to keep an eye on Yennecar. Yennecar. From Ziggs' point of view, he could only see Yennecar's back. Looking at her, it was like he had seen a ghost. Chills ran across his body. Ziggs took a moment to take a deep breath. Yennecar, is something the matter? By chance, are you angry? The girl was smiling gently. I'm not angry. However, because of her protruding veins, Ziggs felt uncomfortable talking to her. Chapter 40. Cat 1. Clara, a second-year magic student and one of Yennecar's best friends, had been standing outside the half-destroyed Ophelis Hall since morning. That was because there was someone that she wanted to meet with. Hello, Ms. Bell. A day has passed since the major destruction caused by the occupation of Ophelis Hall had come to an end. Although the detailed investigation had yet to be completed, amongst the students there were rumors that the maids were somehow involved with the incident. Clara had felt that the rumors were nothing more than that, mere rumors. The school's inspection department would eventually come to a conclusion after discovering more details. Gasp. The reconstruction site of the half-destroyed Ophelis Hall. Since it had barely been 2 days since the incident, no sort of significant reconstruction work had been started. The faculty and maids were busy trying to figure out the extent of the damage. At the entrance of the Rose Garden, she ran into Belle Maya. She was busy taking notes. Clara let out a gasp. Belle Maya, unlike usual, was wearing a dark red maid outfit covered in beautiful decorations. Looking at the blue rose brooch on her chest, the blue frills that came down the hem of her skirt, it was definitely the outfit that only the head maid was permitted to wear. Aren't you a close friend of Lady Yennecar? What brings you all the way to Ophelis Hall? Oh, hello, Ms. Bell. Did you recently get promoted? Due to Ms. Alice's personal circumstances, she was no longer able to fulfill her duty as the head maid. As such, I have been promoted from a senior maid to the head maid. I see. It somehow feels like your position is much higher. There is no reason to feel uncomfortable. Our main duty is to help others. If you need anything, please don't hesitate to let me know. No, it's okay. It's just that, I wanted to talk to you about a personal matter. How should I say this? Never mind, you look quite busy right now. I am a bit busy, but... Belle looked down at her checklist, then glanced back at the half-destroyed Ophelis Hall before shaking her head. Most of the work has already been done, and I don't think I'll need to give out any further orders. I was going to take a break anyway. Oh, is that so? So, what was it that you wanted to talk about? Don't be too surprised. This is top secret. You can never leak this out, and you can't act too surprised. Clara's face stiffened as she leaned in towards Belle with a serious tone to her voice. Belle wondered just what kind of shocking secret she was about to tell her as she paid close attention. It's about Yennecar. I think she likes Ed Roths-Taylor. Having already known that fact to a surprising degree, she wondered if she should at least pretend to be surprised. I just don't get why someone like Yennecar would fall so madly in love with that thug, and as her friend, my feelings are mixed. They had moved over to a bench in the Rose Garden. Clara, who kept on looking around nearby to make sure that nobody was passing by, soon confessed all of the troubles buried deep in her heart to Belle. I've been thinking about this for 3 days and nights already, but, these days, Ed's reputation has improved a bit. I'm sure Yennecar also has something on her mind, so I came to the decision to cheer them on. But I still feel very, very uncertain about it all. As she listened to every word Clara lamented, Belle thought that Yennecar had truly made a great friend. That was because in this world, there are very few people who would truly care for their friends' relationships to that extent. Even though she could have easily ended up interfering in something that was none of her business, Clara made sure to not cross that line and only worried about Yennecar's love life. First off, if Yennecar really thinks of him like that, then as her friend, I really do hope that Yennecar and Ed work out well. I see. You must have been very worried about her, Lady Clara. But, that's not the point. Belle tilted her head. Right as she was going to respond, Clara interrupted, spitting out another girl's name. Lortel Kehaland. You know that name, right? You must, because you were a senior maid at Ophelis Hall. Yes, of course I know of her. Recently, Yennecar has been saying her name quite often. Even though she's a first year, ever since the joint combat practice she has been involved with them quite a bit. Though, it doesn't seem like anything is happening. Clara looked around nearby once more, before quietly lowering her voice and whispering to Belle. So I looked into it personally, and I'm not sure, but they were both absent on the day of the opening ceremony. They were also together yesterday, during their shared first period. Thinking about Yennecar, it seems that she's in quite a pickle. For a girl, the existence of a rival was like a disaster. At first she thought that she may have just had a simple misunderstanding. Ms. Belle, I've heard a lot about you from Yennecar. She said that she relied on you quite a bit and you always gave her helpful advice. I heard that you are quite an insightful person. You're flattering me. And you also know both Yennecar and Lortel quite well, so I came here because I wanted to ask for your opinion. Lady Lortel is quite a famous person. I'm sure that you also know of her, don't you? Rumors about the Golden Daughter Lortel were spreading throughout the school, regardless of the grade. I know of her, but seeing just a bit of her, I just can't see Yennecar winning. I think that Lady Yennecar is a person that is also plenty attractive. Of course I also think that, too. But Lortel is like. Clara's words didn't come out, but Belle nodded her head. Indeed, Lortel Kehaland is definitely a fox-like girl. She is always well behaved and her actions were full of grace. But when an opportunity struck, she was like a little devil that couldn't hide her true, dark feelings. Clara knew that quite well. Her life as a merchant didn't go to waste, so surely she had a better understanding of how to develop relationships and gain the interest of others. I don't have much relationship experience, but, ultimately, relationships between men and women are a game of push and pull. Belle had no choice but to nod her head at Clara's complaining. Yennecar Polarover was innocent and positive by nature, so she only knew how to pull and not push. Lortel, on the other hand, being a merchant, there was no way that she wouldn't be completely capable of controlling the speed of a relationship's growth. No matter how attractive and lovable Yennecar might be, in front of Lortel's skilled tug-of-war she couldn't do anything. She was like a fish on a line. Clara clenched her fist. That can't happen. That's why, I think Yennecar should learn how to play hard to get. Quote ellipsis ellipsis quote. No matter what, I really want Yennecar to learn how to do that. It'll be too painful for her to lose a relationship because of adult charm from a girl a year younger than her. At least she will have gone through a learning experience if she gets rejected by that awful guy instead, but to be robbed of a relationship will only hurt. Belle wanted to applaud Clara, who was passionately expressing her frustration, but she refrained from reacting. To cry to such an extent, worrying about a friend's life. What do you think, Ms. Belle? I heard that you always say the right thing. Those burning eyes of hers turned towards Belle. Honestly, it was a bit awkward. Who can say? I'm really not quite sure. In any case, Belle was already acquainted with Ed, Yennecar, and Lortel. Compared to Clara, who is somewhat biased, she could judge the situation a bit more objectively. I don't think that there is a reason for Lady Yennecar to have to say something that doesn't suit her. You think so? And your thoughts could be perceived as a bit biased as well, right? I think that it's possible that Lady Yennecar is quite a bit more capable than you think, and Lady Lortel could also be less experienced in human relationships than expected, as well. I'm not sure. It's hard to agree with that part. Anyway, it wasn't a good idea to unnecessarily meddle in other people's love affairs. That was the conclusion Belle had come to, so she had no intention of supporting the extremely worried Clarice objective. In the first place, I don't even know much about Ed Roth's Taylor. Is he just a ridiculously stubborn person, or was he just born an unpleasant jerk? In the end, Clarice's hostility all ended up being directed towards Ed Roth's Taylor. In fact, it's kind of ridiculous that she keeps looking at him like that, but he doesn't even realize it. Well, for young Master Ed's case, rather than being a stubborn person or a complete jerk, I think it's just because he's in a situation where it's difficult to have an interest in a relationship. Ed Roth's Taylor was someone who had set up a camp in the northern forest, taking care of food, shelter, and clothing all by himself. Sometimes Belle would come by to give him some food ingredients, herbs and other medical supplies, but Ed had been taking care of the bare fundamentals of survival entirely on his own. In addition to that, he was also studying the academy's curriculum. He was living a life where he had to strategically divide each hour of the day into a task. He was in a spot where getting distracted by a woman for even a few days risked him running out of food. It was already almost autumn, with winter quickly approaching. There would be a lot of other concerns that he will need to prepare for, as well. That can't be possible. Well, he was just born lucky. Having good luck when it comes to girls, I'm sure that he has his mouth open like a creep, drunk on his own popularity. I'm getting the chills just thinking about it. Quote ellipsis ellipsis quote. Belle didn't respond as she clenched her fist, leaving Clara to continue with her story. Well, sometimes it was enough of a relief to just vent to someone else about your issues and worries. Belle closed her eyes as she thought about Ed's situation. Right now, it looked like he was struggling to survive. Would it really be a situation for him to be enjoying his luck when it came to girls? Considering all of that, she gave him a silent prayer. Ultimately, when she thought about all the girls around that boy, she could only think of them as cats and other animals. Lortel Kehaland was like a feisty stray cat, sitting in front of a fish shop. Yennecar Polarover was like an innocent kitten, trembling in fear in front of a tiger. Lucy, well, she was just a cat. Either way, she could clearly see Ed struggling amongst all of those girls as she tried to give him some encouragement that would never reach him. It seemed that she needed to take some time to go and visit Ed's camp. She wanted to check it out, seeing that Clara was worried to such an extent, but there was also a message she needed to deliver from headmaid Alice. Though, it was not good news. It had been a while since the weather was so good. I went over to the stream next to the camp to wash my face and decided to check my life skills. Life skills details. Grade, Intermediate Craftsman, Specialized Fields. Woodworking, Handicraft LVL 13. Design LVL 8. Collecting Skills LVL 11. Woodworking LV 12. Hunting LV 8. Fishing LV 6. Cooking LV 6. Repairing LV 5. Advanced Production Technique Slot, empty. Advanced Production Technique Slot, empty. Since the Advanced Production Technique slots were currently empty, acquiring a new technique that I could use was of the highest priority. I'd already decided on what skills I was going to learn. I planned to start learning spiritual infusion, which has a good compatibility with elementalists, as well as magic engineering, which would be great for making daily necessities and other types of combat-related equipment. Spiritual infusion was acquired automatically once you made a contract with a spirit and produced a product that contained elementalism. Magic engineering, on the other hand, was acquired once you succeed in dismantling and assembling a magically engineered item of a certain level. Compared to combat-type skills and magic-type skills, the methods to acquire them were quite simple and quick. That was the benefit of production-type skills. I didn't want to waste a spirit slot unnecessarily, but if I wanted to start training spiritual infusion in advance, it would be better to just make a contract with a low-ranking spirit immediately. In that case, I thought it would be better for me to make it with a spirit who was of an attribute different than mine. Earth or water spirits. If I start dealing with spirits properly, then I'd start to increase my spirit-type skills proficiency quickly. Then, once my magic-type stats were able to support me, the day that I could make a contract with a high-ranking spirit would come sooner than expected. In that regard, it might have been better to go and get some help from Yennecar. My body condition wasn't great. I couldn't push my body too far doing things that required a lot of work. In other words, because of the occupation of Offelus Hall incident, I ended up pushing myself too far. Because of that, when it came down to labor-intensive work, I couldn't do much of it. Well, what can you do? It was a necessary sacrifice. In any case, I was able to prevent Lortel, one of the main characters of the storyline, from leaving. The plan seemed to have worked to some extent, given that there had been no significant response from Elt yet. The rest needed to be fought out back at Eltie's headquarters, so the only thing we could do was wait for the situation to play itself out and wait for good news from the homing pigeon, which would eventually fly back. Hi, Ed. Now that the rain has stopped, the weather has gotten a bit chilly. Oh, hey, Yennecar. Yennecar still visited the camp every day. It was great, as she would bring all sorts of food ingredients with her. Is Lortel doing okay? Yeah, she's just resting in the cabin. I told Yennecar the entire story. After explaining Lortel's situation to her and how she had to be in hiding for a while, Yennecar had nodded her head and accepted that fact. After that, she started coming over to see if she was okay every single day. However, it was already the start of school and the second semester's curriculum was already underway. Lortel had no intention of going to class until her safety was ensured, and since my uniform was a wreck, I ended up borrowing Zig's. However, I needed to adjust it to fit me. It would be really difficult to attend class until I was able to finish fixing it. So Lortel and I weren't able to go to class until our situation got better. Yennecar, on the other hand, had no such reason. And yet, she still came by the camp every day to sit down and read her magic textbooks. Yennecar, you're not going to class. My head hurts and my condition isn't all that great, so I'm just going to rest here in the northern forest and enjoy the breeze. I already told the professors, and they just told me to take care of myself. Really? You didn't get hurt while trying to help me, right? No way. Definitely not. You should just do what you need to do. I'm just going to sit here enjoying nature, then head back when it's time. Even though Yennecar said that, she didn't seem to be in any sort of pain. She sat down on a wooden stool by the campfire the entire day, reading her book. She would also sometimes glare at the cabin, almost like she was surveying it. It seems that Yennecar didn't fully trust Lortel quite yet. That was understandable. After all, Lortel's past was something quite special. I see, Ed. Well, it's a shame that you can't explain the details of the situation to me, but at least I was able to pay off my debt. As the sun went down, I was off chopping firewood when Ziggs came by to ask about the situation from the previous night and help me out. I gave him a brief explanation of the story, and answered the questions he asked me. Well, it seems that they can't really tell that we destroyed part of Offelus Hall. The building was already half destroyed in the first place, so it wasn't obvious that we destroyed part of it. What about the disciplinary actions against the students? Most of it was put on that upperclassman, Willain, as well as some other students who were dealt a minor punishment. The head maid is still being interrogated, but it doesn't seem like she's opening her mouth. Seeing as there was no mention of Lortel, Alice must have been staying silent. She couldn't hastily confess without knowing if Lortel or Elt was going to win. Once it was safe, she would probably try and secretly make contact as fast as possible. All right. Anyway, this time I owe you. What are you talking about? Next time as well, make sure to let me know if you need anything. I'll be heading out now. Ziggs waved at me as he left. I dropped the axe I was holding next to me and let out a deep sigh. It was probably better that Lortel stayed hidden in the cabin. I could just keep on sharing food with her, and once some time passed and we heard news of our victory, we could both return back to our normal lives. I hoped there wouldn't be any major accidents before then. I sat down in the middle of the forest to take a break, smelling the breeze of the upcoming fall, hoping for a peaceful time. Most of my wounds had healed, so they weren't bothering me too much anymore. The quiet atmosphere inside the cabin calmed her down. Lortel sat, leaning against the rough wall, quietly waiting for time to pass by. Although the occupation of Offelus Hall incident had come to an end, there was still a lot of work left for her to do. The first thing was to win over the former maid Alice again. The rumors going around said that the head maid Alice was keeping her mouth shut in front of the investigators. As she couldn't tell who the winner would be between Lortel and Elt, she was going to stay quiet until she knew for sure. The second thing was to lay the groundwork for the negotiations on the purchase of the Sage's seal. Elt losing his position had ended up happening earlier than expected, but since there was still an opportunity to purchase the Sage's seal, she couldn't waste it. Once the plan was established, Lortel's position in the Elt company would be one of the most influential. Even the head wouldn't be able to touch her easily. Even though she was quite busy, she couldn't do anything about it unless she could quickly fly over to the headquarters. Though, by living in the northern forest, she first had to make sure that she was completely safe before she could head back to take classes. As a student of Sylvania, she should have been a bit frustrated at having to quit her life as a merchant and stay in the cabin for the next 3 days or so, despite being so busy. However, her heart was warm knowing that Ed came to check on her often, making sure she wasn't inconvenienced in any way. It wasn't all that bad, considering the fact she had lived a splendid life full of luxury before suddenly moving into a cabin in the wilds, though, she was sure that it was all thanks to that boy she was with. Her heart would beat fast sitting down next to Ed Roths-Taylor. His unconditional goodwill and unrequited trust made her feel like she was snuggled in a fluffy bed. For some that was only natural, but for Lortel, who had lived her entire life on a cold distant path, that feeling was more precious than gold. It went without saying, but she didn't want to give him up to anyone else. Especially that person, Yennefer Polarover, a girl who had lived her life like a protagonist in a fairy tale. To her, a relationship with unconditional goodwill and trust must have been oh so natural and common. Whether it was her friends or family, they would all support her. To Lortel, though, that man was a luxury. A heartwarming relationship, where she knew that he would never betray her. For Yennefer, he was no more common than a pebble on a street. If she had that many, she should at least give up this one. Lortel had thought she was too cruel, and couldn't understand her at all. Being like that, the only thing left was to fight dirty. Unfortunately for Yennefer, that was Lortel's specialty. Not just that, but spending 3 days with him was such a massive and perfect advantage for her. However, how would their relationship as a man and woman progress? She had taken the initiative in human relationships countless times before, but she didn't know if it would work the same way in a more affectionate relationship between man and woman. That was right. She had been living her life thus far in a brutal business world, where she had to weigh humans by interests alone. That was why she didn't have any knowledge about how a romantic relationship between a man and woman developed. Unexpectedly, this is something I suck at, Lortel thought, as she tried to view herself objectively. It was unlike her usual self. Let's just do it my way. She kept on saying those words to herself as she decided to do things her own way. After all, the easiest way to gain someone's favor was with money. If she buried his shabby cabin with gold coins, then wouldn't he look at her with sparkling eyes anyways? But I'm short on money. Even so, she was still in the middle of reaching out to various businesses. It would affect Lortel's personal assets as well. Still, selling a villa in the mine region or a certificate of land on the outskirts would have a similar performance. However, when she imagined Ed Roths-Taylor's eyes full of childish greed, she shook her head. In the end, since it would be a relationship formed out of money, there wouldn't be any sense of affection. Thinking of seeing him look at her with such eyes, smiling only for his own greed, broke her heart. But even then, it wasn't right to sit around and do nothing. Just by watching Ed throughout the day, she could tell that he was living a hellish life. Without wasting a single minute, or even a single second, he clenched his teeth and struggled to survive. Before her selfish desire to be favored and loved, she also felt a sense of affection, a desire to help him. But on the other hand, she was worried that it might be looked at as pity, and thus would eventually lead to a relationship made out of money. Lortel sat down, cross-legged, as she scrunched her toes. Isn't it okay to help with his tuition? If she gave him that much money, that wouldn't be too much like pity, right? Being a girl who had never given a favor without a cost in the first place, she couldn't even imagine what she should say or how to give him the money. Some examples of the lines she came up with while thinking on it were: Don't get the wrong idea. I'm not just giving this to you because you're my upperclassman. Lortel cringed as she curled her hands and kicked the wall of the hut. She was embarrassed by those lines, but for some reason they felt very natural to her. Didn't she live a life hidden under a mask, with a fox-like smile hiding her dark inner intentions and ideals? Now, even in such a ridiculous situation, she couldn't take off that mask and show her face. Taking a deep breath, she regained her composure. She straightened out the thoughts in her head as she thought about how to get through to him in a seductive, desirable manner. In the first place, if you wanted to watch how and where a relationship between a man and woman crossed the line, it was just a matter of waiting and observing. Anyway, at that moment Ed didn't see Lortel as a woman in the slightest. The development of a relationship would eventually stem from a change of perception. The first course of action would be to change his perception of her. Lortel thought up that plan in her mind as she nodded her head, as if she had decided on what to do. It was impossible to realize at that point just how ridiculous that plan was. As said before, Lortel was good when it came down to controlling or shaking up someone's mind. But when it came to simple and affectionate relationships, which she was awful in, even Yennecar was years ahead of her. Then, specifically, I will need to. However, it would take time to come up with a specified plan of action. For the next 3 days she would be hiding out in the cabin, so she had plenty of time to think it over. She thought that, as long as she planned it out carefully, she would be able to beat Yennecar in no time at all. With a sly smile, Lortel hugged her knees. Can you move over? You're in my spot. However, there was an unexpected event. A new girl had arrived. Yan. She was familiar with that large witch's hat, the school uniform with long sleeves, pigtails that easily came down past her waist to her butt. Someone that she would often meet in Professor Glast's class, and one of the 3 students in Class A. Just when did she enter the cabin? When did she come in from the roof? And when did she learn spatial-type magic? The girl whose movements were impossible to predict, and who would always make the people around her bewildered. Lucy, what are you doing here? This is the best place. It's where the sun shines down the best. She then pushed Lortel away as she threw some marten skin down on the floor, pressed on it hard, and then laid down on top of it. She then fell asleep peacefully, arms wrapped around herself. Quote ellipsis ellipsis quote. In a moment of complete confusion, Lortel wiped her face. Just what's with this girl?